So the garden's been around for a long time, and its use has evolved a lot throughout the years. Today, we're going to be talking about the common house garden. What goes into it? What comes out of it? How does energy and matter tie in? I'm Carter McGuire, and these are the questions we're going to be answering today. So to figure out what goes into a garden, we need to sort every component of it into a box and define it as a system of energy and matter. So the first part of a system that I like to define is the boundary. So the boundary of a system of energy and matter is usually the physical edge of what defines kind of the outermost part of the system. So for a garden, that's probably going to be like a wood fence or something like that, maybe some chicken wire, or sometimes it's just a border between tilled soil and the grass. Obviously it's a little bit overgrown, but that's because it's February. So the next thing to identify would be the key components of the garden. So for that, it seems like the most important parts are going to be your soil, your natural nutrients, and water. So the next thing we can talk about are the inputs. The main one everyone's going to be thinking of are your seeds or your transplants, because that's like the point of the garden. Some other ones are going to be sunlight, because that goes in, and plants use that for their photosynthesis. And another one is going to be extra water that you put in from the garden hose. So from those inputs, we then get our outputs. The main output is the produce, the plants, or whatever you get from your seeds. Some other ones that fly under the radar are going to be oxygen, which comes out of plant leaves after they take in carbon dioxide. And another one is heat, which is a form of energy, and it's often expelled through water vapor. So what role does everything here play? The way everything works, basically, is the boundary kind of defines and protects the system, and then the components inside it work with whatever inputs it gets to create the outputs. And from those outputs, you can see, by the process and feedback, what about the inputs or components might need to be changed. So some of these inputs go in naturally, and other ones go in manually. An example of an input that goes in naturally is sunlight. So sunlight is an energy input, and it of course goes in naturally from the sky. An example of an input that goes in manually are the seeds, which get put in by a person. An example of an input that does both is water, because water is obviously in the soil naturally, and you put in more from the garden hose. Also, I forgot to say, it comes down to rain too. So outputs from a common house garden like this probably aren't going to go anywhere other than right inside the house, but the lesser thought of ones do, like oxygen and heat, because both of those outputs come out of the leaves or through water vapor, and then they dissipate throughout the troposphere. So as I previously stated, sunlight of course comes from the sun and goes into the garden naturally as an energy input. An example of some matter inputs would be water and seeds. But what if we changed an input? Say we have two gardens lined up next to each other, and we add extra water to one and zero water to the other. It doesn't take a genius to figure out what would happen, because while there are some plants that don't need nearly as much water as others, they all do need sun. So eventually, regardless of how long it took, the garden without any water would wither and die. And if you put too much water in the watered garden, sure, that would work for a while, but eventually all the plants would drown. So that's why you gotta be mindful about how much water you're putting in your garden. So back to what we were talking about before about energy. Where does all that sunlight go once it enters the garden? Well, the answer is photosynthesis. So photosynthesis is a process that plants use to create food out of carbon dioxide and water using sun. So once they create that food, they eat it, and then they turn it back into energy, and it's that type of energy that allows them to grow. And the excess energy is used to turn the remainder of the carbon dioxide into oxygen, which gets expelled out through the leaves. So our last big question of the day, how is all the matter of this system classified? So for the most part, all the matter in this system can be broken down into two categories. That's going to be organic and inorganic. So all your organic matter is everything that's alive currently or was alive once. So an example of this would be your produce, or your worms, or your plant residue, anything like that. So things like silt, soil, water, rocks, sand, all that kind of stuff is an example of inorganic matter. So that's about it. Gardens have come a long way since their invention, and I believe they still have a long way to go.